Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This is a webinar we are holding in-house today. No special guest speakers from elsewhere. Min and myself will be presenting. My name is Debbie from NDI's Property Australia. Matthew is in the background. He'll be answering any questions. A little housekeeping. There is a Q&A box down the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions, just pop it in there and Matt will endeavour to answer that during the presentation. If not, then we will address it at the end. We'll do a little Q&A session. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get going. All right, I hope that everybody can see that. So today we are talking about the SDA process. But before we start, just a disclaimer that this is general information and does not constitute financial advice. You need to consult the appropriate professionals for that advice and also get finance pre-approval. We are recording this presentation and everyone who has registered will actually receive a copy of this in the next 24 to 48 hours. And as I just mentioned, any questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll attempt to get to them. So a little bit about us, for those of you who may not be familiar with NDIS Property Australia, we're advisors and consultants assisting stakeholders to build and develop SDA throughout Australia. We're based in Brisbane, but we operate nationwide. We have understood over the several years that we have been in the industry how important it is to educate everybody on all these aspects, which is really what today is all about. We have a lot of data and financial analysis that we undertake here in the office. We have a team in the background working on that. We also now recently have introduced a fee for service where we're not selling the properties. We are selling the properties on one side. On the other side, we are just simply advising people who need assistance and advice on whatever it is that they're doing. We also do have a short-term accommodation respite service, and something that's not mentioned in here, we've recently launched the SDA Housing Assist for any property owners who are struggling to engage a provider or to find tenants for their property. We won't be going into that today, but just so you have a bit more of an understanding of who we are. We also have the SDA Housing Podcast that has 2 episodes drop each week. Lots of really informative information you can listen to on that podcast. And as you can see, a team here of I think now 26, and we are growing all the time. We're looking at bringing on a few more staff members as well in the next few weeks. So very exciting times for NDI's Property Australia. But today we're going to talk about this, which is a flowchart Min actually devised beginning of this year. He sat down and said, well, there's so many aspects to SDA and let's kind of just put it all into a mud map. And I don't think any of us realized just quite how complex that was. Min, do you want to just tell us a bit more of the background of how this all came together?
Yeah, I've always, for the last few years, wondered what is really involved, all the moving parts in the process of investing in SDA. People think it's very easy. Finding a block of land, building a 4-bedroom house, and it's build it and they will come, right? That's the idea, the mentality that most people have had in the last few years. And how wrong was that, Debbie? I mean,
oh, absolutely. And we're really seeing the results of that now with a lot of people with bad properties in areas that they can't tenant.
Yeah, and it made me think 6 months ago, what is going wrong? Where are people falling over, and what part? And just looking at this document here, which you'll all get in the video recording in the PowerPoint slide here, obviously, which you can go at your own pace. but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 elements to a successful SDA investment in those property. Can we at least start with the first one, Debbie? Advice process. Can you
Well, actually,
get that?
before that, we were going to go through a few other basics about
Oh yeah,
SDA.
sure. Yeah.
So let's
Should I stop
start.
here and move to the next slide? Yeah.
Yeah, so this is what we're going to actually be covering, those 8 processes within SDA. Also, just touch on some of the market trends where SDA is at the moment, a little bit of information about what investors, what challenges and concerns they have, and what they really need to understand about SDA. So, market trends, just a little understanding for those who maybe only recently looking into SDA. It's now 8 years old, and NDIS itself rolled out 11 years ago, yesterday, 1st of July. So as Min said, initially a lot of the construction and builds were based on the assumed design and on the build it and they will come sort of concept. Only from 2019 did we actually have the SDA design standard with the minimum build requirements that were needed to actually have a property certified as an SDA property. So for the first few years, properties weren't even meeting minimum designs because there were none. So that was a real interesting part of what has happened in the design area. So we've learned a lot in that time. Participants obviously have given their feedback on these properties. Providers have given their feedback on these properties because it's very much their workplace. It's very important that it works for them as well as for the participants who it's for them, it's their forever home. So now we do have a maturing SDA market where we are seeing quite an oversupply in certain areas of inferior properties. When I say new builds, I'm referring to anything that was enrolled after 2016, from 2016 onwards. And again, in areas where there is no demand or the demand has already been sated. So that came about a lot really because of the cheap land in new estates. People built there thinking, fantastic, we can spend a minimum amount and get an SDA property and get these huge returns. And, we've well and truly learned that just doesn't work. So that leads us into what investors want. Min, do you want to talk to this or leave me?
You go for it, Debbie. You go for it.
All right. So what investors want obviously is transparency in terms of risks and what costs they're going to be having to pay out, rather than not just the house and land package, but all the other costs that will be incurred. They want diversity. They want to have a good selection of locations, house and land, apartments, development sites. We're getting more and more people wanting to purchase a built SDA property. They want knowledge. So, we do provide that. We do our own internal research and training. We do a lot of reports, which we will touch on later. Investors obviously also want confidence. So we ourselves, we are a real estate agent in terms that we are licensed in every state of Australia. We don't operate as a real estate agency. We only work in the NDIS field. We're not into the hard sell. We're not a provider. We don't have those conflicts of interest. And we are focused on other areas of NDIS property as well. The challenges for investors, there's a lack of transparency from vendors. They really struggle to understand the risks. They don't know what the income is actually going to be with the uncertainty of tenancy. They don't know where to go to find the resources they need to understand and learn about SDA. There's a lack of supply and demand data. It's out there. It's not the be-all and end-all, and is severely lacking in terms of what the NDIS publish. There's a lack of lenders. Finance approvals are another challenge, and really just understanding the true costs of a property can be a big challenge for investors. So their concerns are high upfront costs, potential changes to the NDIS scheme, vacancy risk, tenant turnover, compliance requirements, and the fact that it is a limited market and limited resale options. I won't go into too much detail on any of these, but just to very quickly address, yes, these properties cost more because they are very high spec, and I don't think people realize quite what goes into the construction, the back end of these. And it's not just about the physical building requirements. It's all about the certification and the different specialists required in the early stages of developing these and the plans that can add to the cost. Especially now we're talking about a lot of properties needing to be class 3 of the NCC National Construction Codes, because certain councils and areas of Australia are requiring that, and that brings in a whole lot of additional costs as well. Potential changes, we hear a lot about the NDIS and problems and rorting and changes, and people quite rightly are concerned that what's going to happen if the government decides to change all this. Just as a quick point on that, we don't feel that there will be any significant changes at all to SDA. When we look at the overall funding, the NDIS itself has, I think it's about 45 billion budget currently.
This year, 42 billion this year.
42 billion. SDA is 700 million allowed in the budget, of which only about half of that is currently being paid out. It is a spec, so there's not even 1% of the overall NDIS budget. It's evident to everyone in the industry and the system how much SDA contributes to cost savings in the long term. So we believe that this is not going anywhere. We're very comfortable that SDA is here to stay for good. So that covers those points, and I think we just want to talk more about the actual 8-step process. So the first one we're going to cover is the advice process. Min, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Where do I begin? Solicitor, accountant, financial advisor, mortgage broker, providers, build designers, SDA assessors, and builders. I mean, these are all very important people involved in the advice process for you as an investor to move forwards. Now, directly, solicitor, there's direct engagement of process here. Directly, you'll talk to solicitors, accountants, your finance people, and the SDA provider. They're the direct. The indirect are the build designers who work with the builder, the SDA assessor who works with the builder, and the valuers in the background who work with the lender, with the builder, with yourself as a client. So always please surround yourself with professional people who can give you good advice, right, to help you understand the process of what's involved in the acquisition of land and build. Okay, so the majority of SDA dwellings by investors is mostly house and land packages around Australia. However, we're seeing a significant shift towards the apartment and the apartment world of SDA housing. Lack of land and price increases for land prices are affecting the appetite for new house builds. I think, Debbie, we have about 50-50 ratio of houses versus apartments around Australia. The pipeline construction of SDA around Australia is 50-50 between apartments and houses. Yep.
Yeah.
So it's important to always get everyone's professional opinion. I personally think the old way of last 4, 5, 6 years, where all the investors have been brainwashed to think that houses are the way to go, is actually incorrect. It's really 50-50. And Debbie, with regard to the research that we have purchased from Housing Hub, some foundation, and also the data from the NDIA, the number of people searching for alternatives who are currently in SDA is pretty high at 40-45%, isn't it?
In some areas, it's that high. The number of people who are searching for properties where they can live on their own is also up around that mark. So that's really telling Yeah, people searching for an SDA property who are already living in one means that they're not happy where they are. And secondly, a lot of them want to live on their own.
Yep. Okay. Next slide, please. So that was the advice process. Just a very short summary of who investors should be talking to. Next one will be, I assume, build. Is that right? Build process. Whoa, there we go. Debbie, your turn.
Okay, so
I've done it to you because I'll be too technical, right? I want you to be very, very layman's language. Yeah.
all right, I can
What do
do
you know?
that. Yeah, so look, I guess this is just for investors to understand what goes in to get into the point where we actually have a package. We do have a lot of builders that we work with, developers that we work with around Australia. So they've gone through all of this to start with before we even usually see what they're bringing to us to sell. And obviously, that's things like the design, preliminary drawings, the floor plan. There's going to be the costs that go into them determining what the price of the build is going to be. There's going to be build approval. And of course, during the build process, once an investor has purchased this, is going to be things like your deposit, your staged payments leading up to completion. But back to the concept design. Really important to understand. You're not just building a house here, you're building a very specialized care facility, essentially. So there's going to be a lot that goes into with build covenants. You've got different council regulations, building regulations, NDIS requirements, other requirements that go into what has to be done to have that property approved both by the council and secondly by the NDIA. Block suitability, it's not, you can't just build it anywhere. It's got to be really on a very specific type of block, specific type of location. You've got a pre-certification and a post-certification, which means basically that the plans need to be registered with the NDIS after an assessor gives them the tick of approval. Once the property is built, the assessor will then go in again and give it a tick of approval for as complete certification. But really important, and something we talk about a lot in this process, is future proofing. And
Debbie, I want to throw a curveball here to you. If we chose 10 random builder packs proposals around Australia, 10 random builders, right? And we showed this list here called future proofing against all those packages. How many of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, how many of these 13 points will get a tick against those packages, do you think?
Maybe 2 or 3.
I reckon 0.
Well, we're seeing fire sprinklers quite common now. We're seeing second living areas are quite common.
Well, what I mean be across all Australia, all the builders, how many are they actually delivering? I don't see hardly anything here
across Australia. I guess I'm referring to the builders we're working with, and we work very closely with them to make sure that they are providing a superior design.
True, but the average builder in NDIS housing,
right, probably none.
None of these.
So they're building.
Look how important it is. Look at it all.
Absolutely. They're building to minimum requirements still, which don't include any of these things.
Debbie, why do builders build minimum requirements out there around Australia for the last 5 years? Why is that?
They have never consulted with anybody who can tell them otherwise. They are building the cheapest product to sell it. There can be a number of different reasons. So, but they're just bringing forward the basic build, meets the SDA guidelines, fantastic. Build it and move on.
So, to all our attendees watching this video, this webinar, please keep in mind, right? When you live in your forever home, this is you as a normal human being. Do you want to live in a very small block, very small house, with no space, no yard, just bare standards of a normal investment property. There's a big difference between that and a very spacious upmarket product as a home.
Mm.
Put yourself in their shoes, right? If you have the power of choice and control as a participant who's disabled and have full funding by the NDIS, SDA funding, sorry, you have a right to choose what's best for you as a participant. And I say to you, either investors or participants or families or participants, always do what's best for you that makes you happy in your lifestyle as a participant. And participants should have the right to choose where and who and how they live their life as a fully funded SDA participant in the NDIS. And they need these kind of things, not all of it, maybe a third of it at least, to make their life easier. I mean, extra storage. Where do you put your spare wheelchairs, right? What if there's a fire issue hazard in the area? Is there a space for a study nook or a study room to actually do work from home or do your as a spare room for a media room, whatever? You need these changes to your design to make it a suitable home long term, which is future proof. And that's so important. Debbie, we did a podcast about 8-9 months ago. I think we should definitely link that in the email going out to the attendees to listen to. It's a nice 45-minute audio podcast, that we did. Yeah.
All on future proofing, indeed. Yeah.
Mm.
All right. I think we should move on.
Mm.
So this time we are going to be talking about the finance process. This is definitely your area, Min.
Okay. Well, contrary to what everyone thinks, you can't get 10% deposit. No. You need a good amount of cash to get your loan approved. Serviceability is one thing, but also cash deposit is another thing. Debbie, you and I did a podcast about 6 months ago on the cash required for purchasing an NDIS SDA property.
Probably not quite that long ago, probably a few months ago.
I mean, what's the average price of a package and what's the average deposit and what's the average costs and the hidden costs as well? Yeah.
Yeah. Look, if you look at an average package price these days, we're looking at 1 to 1.1 million. So
wait. I actually would say to you 850 to 950 is the average package.
I guess.
The ideal package is 1 to 1.2. Yes. Yeah.
All right. So let's call it 9 as an average package cost. So if you qualify for 10% deposit, that's all well and good. But you do need a really significant buffer. You've got your holding costs. You've got your mortgage payments will increase as your bill payments go to the builder during construction. You also have obviously your legal and financial fees up front. You're going to have your rates on the block of land. But what a lot of people don't consider, which is SDA specific, are things like your provider engagement fees, your participant procurement fees, optional furniture package, which very often is not really optional. You're going to be required to put it in if it's needed by the potential tenants to move in. And then the fact that at the end of construction, there's always going to be a delay between key handover, certification, and your tenants actually moving in, and then the funding being paid from the NDIS. That absolute bare minimum would be 3 months. It could be 6 months. It could be 9 months. You really don't know. Best case scenario is all well and good, but you've got to allow for a worst case scenario. So we recommend 6 to 9 months mortgage repayments on a vacant property and those extra holding costs. You should be looking at having a minimum $100,000 to $150,000 buffer to be comfortable.
I think as a rule of thumb, Debbie, 20 to 30% of the purchase price is the amount of cash you should have, between 20 and 30.
Yeah.
And that 20, 30 depends on your serviceability and your cash flow from your household to service debt. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot to consider there. But yes, we do have that podcast. We'll have the link for both of those podcasts mentioned. We will include when this goes out to everybody. But moving on, the next part of the process is the vetting process.
Look at that there. So can you go back, Debbie? Go back. So vetting process, vetting the buyer, the locations, the product types, the provider, the builder, the infill versus estate areas. And from there, to vet the buyer, capital outlays, risk profile, SDA knowledge, NDS knowledge, readiness, dwelling type expectations. And from the capital outlays, as you spoke about earlier, Debbie, pre-build costs, holding costs, and post-build costs. Okay.
So let's
The
go into
slide.
that.
So this is a bit of an overlap from last slide we spoke about. Yeah.
Just the holding costs really, and the post-build. So, but I guess vetting is crucial in getting the right people involved and making sure that you're buying the right package in the right area. So that comes down to understanding your risk profile and making sure you've got enough SDA and NDIS knowledge. You really shouldn't be going into this blind. You should, always cover yourself and make sure you know what you're getting into. So having an understanding of the dwelling type, of what your expectations are, all sorts of things that go into that. It's just really about vetting yourself as a buyer. Are you ready for this? Is this the right type of investment for you? And vetting the builder, the provider, and the product itself.
Debbie, we have feasibility reports that can help answer a lot of these questions regarding pre, post, and holding costs. Hey, do you want to explain that to the listeners?
Yeah, I'll go into it in more detail at the end of the presentation, but we do have a huge amount of reports that we have on offer for people to purchase from us, not least of which are supply and demand data reports and package analysis reports. So moving on to the provider process. Okay, Min.
Okay. People think that just because you know a provider, engage or talk to a provider, that's all you need, right? Couldn't be further from the truth. A SIL provider is someone who cares, provides a care provision for participants on site in the dwelling. The SDA provider is a service that looks after the bricks and mortar, the dwelling itself.
Yeah, they're literally the property manager. Plus.
The SDA provider manages the property and the SIL provider and the onboarding of the participant into the dwelling. They also manage the cash payments or cash flow payments from the NDIA and also Services Australia with regard to the MRRC, which is the reasonable contribution. Yeah.
And I think it's really important for people to understand that a house or a dwelling cannot be enrolled as an SDA certified property without an SDA provider doing it. Only the SDA provider can do that process. So you must engage an SDA provider before your house can be officially an SDA property.
Yeah. So the NDIS is I wouldn't call it a cottage industry. The SDA is a cottage industry within the NDIS. A lot of providers have popped up around Australia, small little businesses, 1-2-man teams, some bigger businesses, managing the management of SDA housing, I guess. But this word here, provider, is both the SILs and the SDA providers. And the topics in front of you there show you the logistics, the background checks, the vetting that goes into running or managing a provider business. Just because you have a good brand and service a big area for NDIS doesn't necessarily mean you'll be able to deliver a good service, because at the end of the day, you need participants and staff to deliver that service, right, Debbie? Logistics is a very big important matter with regards to staffing and rostering, Debbie.
Huge, and I think a lot of the problem that many care providers or SDA providers and property owners face is that there just aren't enough care providers in the area. The participants might be there, but they're already not getting the care. that they need. There's not enough carers in the location. This is really specifically important when you're talking about maybe more rural locations, what we call thin markets. That's a big issue. But it can happen anywhere as well,
Mm.
in outlying areas of the bigger cities.
Debbie, do you want to explain to our viewers the challenges in today's market with regards to SDA providers being overwhelmed in the current market? And
Yeah.
then the reason why we've created SDA Housing Assist as well, please.
Sure. So, firstly, I guess there's the financial aspect. SDA providers have set themselves up to manage a certain number of properties, and they may have onboarded those properties, and they're currently in the process of trying to procure participants, tenants, to move into them, to build their networks of still providers they're working with, and they are completely over capacity. They cannot handle all the work that they're currently doing, trying to manage 100, for example, properties and 200 tenants and a bunch of different still organizations. That's one side of it. So there are now some SDA providers that we know of that are literally saying, sorry, we're not taking on any more properties at the moment. We don't have the capacity. On the other side of that is that they may be struggling to actually run a profitable business. The reason for that being is that there have been a lot of delays. I believe it's slowly being eased up, but with the payments coming from the NDIS for the SDA payments, there's two reasons for that. One is that the whole NDIS payment system is migrating to a new setup, and that's caused all sorts of hurdles and hiccups and complications. But also, secondly, even just so that the property itself needs to be enrolled as an NDIS property, as an SDA property. And then when a tenant moves in, the SDA provider then needs to create a service agreement to submit to the NDIS to pay the SDA funding for that participant in that property. And we've been told by numerous providers, that SDA providers, that there's often a lot of delays and hiccups with that happening as well. It can be months before they get that service agreement correct and in place. And until that time, the SDA funding won't be paid. So not only does the owner of the property miss out, but the providers themselves, the SDA providers themselves, are also not getting an income because they charge a percentage of the rental return, if you like. So if they're not got the cash flow coming in, they're going to be struggling to run their business too.
Okay. So let's move on.
Research process. I guess this is my area, Min.
Yeah.
So as I touched on earlier, we do a huge amount of research when it comes to SDA. We analyze the data that comes out every quarter from the NDIS. We're always talking to providers and builders and lenders on the ground, finding out what's going on, what they know, giving us more intel about the current status of number of participants, what their funding is for, what pipeline builds are out there, what lenders are lending for. So we do this extensive analysis on all the packages that come in for us to sell. So, we do our due diligence, make sure that the packages we're comfortable in selling them because they are a good design in a good location. And we also do identify the gaps. So when we do have people coming to us, or builders or developers, we can lead them to suggest areas where they may wish to consider doing SDA development because we can see such a big gap there. So yeah, the research, it covers so much more than just the supply and demand. When we do look at a package, we look at the actual location of it, the local amenities, the physical site, how far away it is from, like, one thing to consider is the rolling distance. If someone is in a wheelchair and they are quite capable of wheeling themselves out of their house, they want to go down the local shops, they want to get on local transport, are those facilities in rolling distance? What about the footpath outside their home? Is it in good maintenance? Is that going to work for them? Of course, hospitals, a lot of participants need regular, like weekly visits to rehabilitation facilities, or just hospitals that provide disabled services. They might need regular physiotherapy. So just saying that this property is 5 minutes away from the hospital, if it's not the right kind of hospital, it's irrelevant. So there's all sorts of things that need to go into making a location good, not just the demand. So the participant population overall, and comparing that to the number of SDA participants in the area. Housing Hub, GoNest are good sites to go to look at the current SDA vacancies that are being advertised. Even the NDIS themselves have an SDA finder. So there's all sorts of different areas where you can go as someone in the public to find data. We are lucky enough with all of our contacts to be able to get more intel across the board as well, that we can offer you by way of just simply good packages that we're selling, or by advice or reports that we have on offer.
Debbie, we had a new contact, an agent, contact us last week. Adam, he wanted to review a couple of different areas in Melbourne and a couple of packages. I mean, if you want to explain to our listeners, our viewers here, the process and the background that we went about to vet one of the packages and vet some of the areas, and
Yeah,
explain that, please.
yeah.
Yeah.
So he's relatively new to the NDIS world, knows a little. He has buyers that wish to purchase NDIS properties. So he has actually presented some properties to some of his clients, but he's not comfortable with them. So he actually came to us and said, can you help me here? And we said, of course we can. We narrowed it down to the fact that he's got 10 packages he's currently got his clients looking at, over about 9 different locations. And we selected a couple of different packages for their diversity. We then selected about 4 different locations to do reports on, which he was very happy to engage us to undertake. And so that very much goes into, we did a supply and demand data report, which went into very focused detail on the area, on the demographics of the area, but most importantly, the data, including what we know beyond the NDIA data. And that then led into the package report in that same area, where we analysed the actual package, the floor plan, the physical location, as I mentioned, the distance to amenities, rolling distance, those sorts of things, parks and libraries and swimming pools in the area. And actually, we also have an in-house ranking system that we do rank all of our stock on. And this particular package came out as a 2 out of 5, which is, we don't have anything on our stock list that is ranked that low. Basically, that's a pretty poor package all up. So that's the sort of thing that we can do.
Yeah, because out there in the marketplace, investors don't know how to vet something. They're seeing all these things on Facebook and all these things emailed to them and all these different webinars out there. But how do they really know what is a good area, who is a good builder, what is good advice? And this is where we're doing our part to help other investors or other builders or other agents to vet the information so that they can present it to their clients to make an informed decision. Mm. Now, we're not involved in those sales process. We're here to only give advice to those people who engage us to do the background check on that area or product. That's where we do there.
Yeah, and I just want to note that the location was actually quite good. It's a location we are looking at and selling in terms of the NDIA data, a good future demand, undersupply of new build properties, but the package itself was inferior, basically. So, if you are really wanting to know more about what you're looking to get into, Yeah, ask us. We're happy. We don't care if we're not selling it to you. We're very happy to give you advice on that.
Mm.
But moving on, we should be talking now about the buying process. So, Min, I'm going to let you go through this one.
Well, the buying process, I think, as a buyer of SDA, the basic question is who, what, where, how, why. Who are you buying from? Where are you buying it? Why are you buying it? What are you buying? And yeah, who, what, where, how, why, and how are you buying it? How is really SMSF, superannuation, or non-superannuation? What are you buying? Are you buying an apartment, a house, or a villa? Who are you buying it from? A, a builder, or an agent, or a second, third level agent? Out there in the marketplace, there are lots of layers of agents. Agent 3, Agent 2, Agent 1, developer. So there's 3 layers or 4 layers people to get through to get the source of stock. So, all these questions are going to be asked, but the most important process here in front of you now on this slide here is the education process. Why are you buying this? What's the reason for buying SDA in your property portfolio? Okay, that's your prerogative. It may be to pay off debt, maybe to build wealth, or maybe to diversify your assets. Whatever it is, but that's your call. But the education process is very important. Are you listening to podcasts? Are you going to webinars? Are you going to the Disability Expo? Are you attending conferences and workshops? Are you purchasing or downloading research papers on SDA and NDIS? Are you doing a feasibility report? They are very important for you all to really do your homework. Because at the end of the day, if something goes wrong for you as an investor, you only have yourself to blame. Okay, so it's very important for you to do your own homework. Now, from the research papers section there's a breakdown further of 10, I think, 10 here, 10 subtopics. The supply and demand reports. Do you know what the tenancy mix funding is? Debbie, what is tenancy mix funding, please?
Tenancy mix is, okay, you might buy a property that is a high physical support home for 2 tenants. And you assume you're going to have tenants move in who've got funding to live in a high physical support home with one other, i.e. 2 tenants. That is really the case. You will more likely have a mix of tenants move in who've got different funding levels. They might have fully accessible, they might have improved livability, they might have funding to live in a villa, not a house. They might have funding for to live in a 3-tenant property, not a 2-tenant property. And all of these variables make huge differences to the income. So do you understand that?
And the best way to figure that out is to engage a company like us to do the report for you and for you to assess the numbers and see whether it's worthwhile or not to move forward with. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to jump into an investment property and assume the maximum rental return, ROI, rate of return, return on investment, sorry, is the maximum return being 22%, 21% return with 2 HPSs on 1-2 funding, which is very rare in the case, right? And we did a podcast last week, I think, on forecast yields and cash flow. And Debbie, do you want to give a little bit of a 1-minute summary of that podcast episode, please?
Yeah, well, it was literally, as I just said, a lot, not so many, we're not seeing so many builders brochures out there these days with a projected return or income. But those that are putting in this figure, this $200,000 projected income on the property, which is based on the potential highest possible. And that is so unlikely. Just as a very quick overview, out of all the SDA funded participants, 20% roughly have funding for high physical support. So, and out of those, a much smaller percentage would have funding to live in a house with one other, i.e. a two-tenant home. So that is a very unlikely scenario. A far more likely scenario is going to be somewhere on the lower end where you might have an IL, improved livability participant, and an FA or a fully accessible participant with 1 to 3 funding to live in a 3-tenant house sharing, and that's going to reduce your income significantly. So you need to understand the lower potential and the high potential and be happy with the lower potential and hope that you're going to get somewhere in the middle there. And that's kind of what we covered in that podcast.
Yeah. Look, expect this 7 to 10% return net yield. Yes. Don't pray and hope for a 20% return because you're not going to get it. Okay. I've spoken to so many providers the last 3 to 4 years, and they keep on telling us, Debbie, when it comes to SDA investments, it just shocks us. Their words are, it shocks us to see how easy it is for investors to throw common sense out the window and chase after greed returns. Okay, I can guarantee you all who's listening right now, if it was anything else other than the NDS property or SDA, you'd be doing so much research, right, and analysis on everything before you jumped into buying any normal property. But when it comes to SDA, everyone just throws caution out the window and assumes it's going to be a 200 grand rental return and 20% yield. It's not the case, everyone. Be
No.
very, very careful. Yeah, very careful.
And, unfortunately, there are a number of unscrupulous players out there in the market selling these properties, and they are selling a dream. They're selling the idea. It's government funded, and you're going to get this much income. And for the investor who's not doing their full due diligence and research, they can get easily swayed by that story because it is a great story, but it's not reality. So,
The terminology that we often go through in our podcast is DDD, triple D effect. Debbie, what do those triple D acronyms mean?
design, desirability, and data.
Yep, you want to explain that?
Design, it's got to be a really good designed property. It's got to have the right, everything we're talking about, future proofings, a good number of those to make it really good design for the participants to live in, for the carers to work in. Desirability, it's got to be a desirable product. It's got to be in the right area. It's got to be a house or an apartment or a villa or a dwelling that a participant who has the choice and control is going to choose over every other one in that suburb or area because it is the most desirable. Data, all about the supply, the demand, and all the more in-depth parts of that process.
Speaking of data, just because you do the in-depth data research today does not mean that in a year and a half from now, the data is still valid. It isn't. Debbie,
Absolutely not.
explain,
Oh,
please.
look, this industry is changing so quickly and a new area will open up. And we've seen this, a good example is Western Australia, which only actually came on board the SDA scheme in 2021. So all the builders and developers decided, great, let's start building SDA over there. And yes, there was obviously great demand because there were no properties and not a lot of sort of older legacy style government disability properties either, or if there are, they're not showing up in the data at all. But we knew that obviously they were starting from scratch. They needed a lot of SDA built. And there is a huge amount of SDA being built. And we have seen with those quarterly reports coming out, massive changes. Every 3 months, that data changes so significantly. Where new estates open up, massive amount of pipeline going in there. Suddenly, everything changes in the building industry, and that tips everything on its head. So it's changing all the time. Also, we've noticed more changes in the funding of participants. What I mean by that is um, the data that the NDIS was previously putting out was giving us an idea of how many participants had funding and what type of funding that was, whether it was high physical support, improved livability, robust. Then they actually stopped giving us that information. They've obviously, from what I understand, is they're fine-tuning their data, where they're capturing that information from, and they're now giving us quite different data, just based on participants who've got funding and they're using it, and participants who have got funding but are not using it, i.e. they're not currently living in an SDA, and a small number of people who are currently in the process of getting their funding approved. So that changed the demand side really significantly. And every time, maybe not every single quarter the data is released, but probably twice a year, we see changes in that data that's being reported. And it's, from one year to the next, it changes hugely. Funding
Mm.
levels as well. A year ago, we saw massive change in the SDA funding with a huge price review, and that changed everything. So it's a really constantly moving industry, and everything needs to be analysed with the most current information you can get your hands on.
I also want to say people have been talking for many years now about the whole concept of participant-led products, participant-led areas, right? If you work on an area or a package or an opportunity which has participants in a certain area, remember it takes 12 months to build a house or 12 months to deliver a project with apartments or villas. There's no guarantee that they will still be waiting for you at completion 12 months from now or a year and a half from now. Very rarely is the case. We're seeing a lot of that at the moment, Debbie, because, yeah, what else is there to say about that? There's nothing really.
Yeah, look, it's one of the risks, and this is why it's a risky investment. I guess when it comes back to the data, that's when it's really important to analyze the type of dwellings that are currently enrolled. We take a lot of notice of the new build versus the legacy and existing properties that are enrolled in the system. Existing is anything that was a disability home pre-2016 that got brought over into the SDA system. It generally does not meet the design guidelines and the minimum requirements, and is therefore very often not fit for purpose. The legacy homes are anything 6 or more participants. So the big group homes, they will be phased out and defunded within 10 years of SDA rolling out in each jurisdiction. And in the East Coast, that's only 3 years away now. So we also look at the number of places that are currently sitting in the legacy and the existing homes. And if there's a significant proportion in that area and not so much new build dwellings enrolled or in the pipeline, then you know that, even in 12 months' time, you're going to have a good supply of participants likely transiting from those old properties. If you're in an area where there are no existing or legacy properties, that's where you probably need to be more careful if there's already a decent supply that's getting close to meeting the demand.
Mm. Wonderful. Next slide, please, Debbie.
We're going to be talking about the final one, the participants process.
Yeah. Debbie, your turn.
Okay. Yeah, I guess this is really about understanding the complex process involved in a participant's life for them to get funding to live in an SDA home, and then what it takes for them to move in. So someone has some kind of a condition and they're part of the NDIS. Their support coordinator, maybe their occupational therapist, will say to them, listen, we believe you would qualify for SDA. Let's put together an application for this. So that is going to involve the OT. It's going to involve other allied health professionals. It's going to involve their support coordinator and likely other plan manager, LAC, potentially, to put together the reams of paper for this report to prove to the NDIA why this participant will needs to live in an SDA home. And please, Min, you're muted.
We should have added some more names to this list here. Physiotherapist, psychologist, doctor, should be added to this list eventually as well.
Yeah, so, you know, all sorts of allied health professionals. But so that's the start process for the participant. All going well. They've applied for HPS funding. They get it. Very often they don't get what they want. That has to then go in for review and another review potentially. And if that still doesn't provide them the funding that they want, remember, it's all about the participant's choice and control. They can then take it to the AAT. We do know a participant who we work very closely with who went for 3 years fighting for the right funding that he wanted. So anyway, that's the process for a participant to get funding. Then move into a home. They want to find a home that's in the area where they are from, where their families are, where their support networks are, where their carers are based. And they might want to live in a home with a backyard and share with a couple of other people. They might like the social contact there. Or they might wish to live on their own in an apartment or a villa. So then they've got to find the right property that matches them. And if that property doesn't exist, they're, you know, potentially going to be waiting a long time. Or they might have to move into a property that doesn't suit them because they desperately need to live in one of these properties, and it's going to be their home while they wait for something else to come along. That's unlikely. We know most providers we speak to say that participants, once they're in that home, it's very, very unlikely for them to move on. But we do, at the same time, know, looking at the data, that there are participants living in SDAs that are looking. So that's, again, goes back to making sure your property is desirable, the design is good. But when that participant then selects a home that they want to move into, they apply, the owner accepts their application. Obviously, they've got to move in. They probably need a furniture package. They might need other small specific things done to the property that they need that other participants wouldn't. And this is all down to the SDA provider in collaboration with the SIL provider and the participants, working out what is needed. So again, that can be another process of getting the participant in. Another big complication is their funding. Yes, they're funded for SDA, and all going well, you would have someone with 2-tenant funding move into your 2-tenant home, but they might have care funding at a 1 to 3, meaning that the care provider is only getting enough money from their plan to look after 3 people from one carer, and that doesn't connect with the SDA funding. So that process can be really complicated. And I'm not even going to start to talk about the compatibility issues if you are in a shared home, if you've got a shared home. And when I say shared, I mean, you know, for minimum 2 participants. Min, have you got anything to
I
add
got
to
nothing to add to that. Sorry, nothing at
all? Okay, so I think that's our last slide on the process, on the mud map. And I hope that gives you kind of a good idea of all the different considerations that you really should be looking at here. Very quickly, bit of an outlook for the SDA market. Just want to tell you where we are currently at. 22,000 SDA funded participants, and the government have projected 29, nearly 30,000 by 2027. So that's 8,000 extra participants. That's they're going to have to get those approvals happening a lot quicker than they currently are. But that's only 3.4% of all NDIS participants. So it's a really small part of the market. Now, the total places in existing and pipeline builds, so anything that is enrolled, so that's actually an incorrect word. That should have said enrolled, not existing, is 30,555. So 22,000 participants, 30,000 places. That looks like we've actually got an oversupply, but 13,000 places are in legacy and existing homes, which I was just discussing. Those will, a lot of those, if not most of those, will be phased out of the system, leaving us with currently only 8,746 places in new build dwellings. 8,500 pipeline places, of which we assume the majority will actually get built. So we're looking at about a bit over 17,000 places for 22,000 participants, but we're looking at 30,000 participants. So you can see there that the long-term outlook is that we actually have a significant undersupply here. And as I said before, it's so important to take into account those legacy and old dwellings that really shouldn't be part of the SDA system in a lot of cases. So, I hope that gives you a bit of comfort that that demand going forward is going to be there for a long time yet. We're nowhere near at the end of the SDA development market, if you like. So again, just to give you an overview, there's a lot that we've covered in there, a lot of different aspects. And I wanted to finally we've talked about this a couple of times now, the research reports. If you are interested in finding more about the different reports that we have on offer, you can go to our website, ndis.property/reports, and see what we've got there. It gives you all the prices and all the inclusions there for various types of reports or even consultations. So that comes to an end of our presentation. And I think we got a couple of questions. Matt has been answering some, but Min, you might want to.
So we have a question here from Sharish. He asks, how would I come in contact with the right provider and when? The right provider, well, there are so many providers all around Australia, so I can't really comment on where you're investing in first, right? So it comes down to where are you going to invest in. But if you were investing into an area like Melbourne, for example, once you've settled your block of land, well, there's two answers here. Number one is talk to a provider before you purchase the investment in the area. So you have validation from more than one, so maybe 2 or 3 different providers who confirm that the area is of high demand for SF participants, number one. Number two, once you've purchased the block of land and construction begins, you should definitely engage with a provider to start sourcing participants for your house. So when completion occurs, then definitely have tenants ready. So the average time frame to fill a house up with 2 tenants is about 9 months after completion. So if you start probably 7 to 8 months before completion, that will probably get you in early with house being filled up in month 4, 5, 6. But if you wait to the very end of completion, you end up being 10 months late after completion. So really the answer is when you start construction of your dwelling, engage your provider. There you go. Next question. What are your fees for conducting or assessing of the viability of a package SDA property? Debbie, please.
So our price for an SDA package is $650 plus GST. That will give you an analysis and an overview of the actual package, as well as the location, the supply and demand, the design and inclusion. So we go into quite a comprehensive analysis there. I touched earlier on our internal ranking system. So we sort of base it on that. And that there's a lot of criteria that we analyze that ranges from and it covers things like the desirability and the design, but the actual location, the demographics, the actual size of the house, extra living areas, different future-proofed features like that, how many, if all the bathrooms are en suite. We also look at the cost of the package, compared to others. There's a whole lot of different criteria that we analyze. So that is a $650 plus GST report for that. And just
And
to
the
the
data
data
report, Debbie,
report is $400 for our supply and demand data report. So the package report goes into the supply and demand plus, gives you more information.
moving on. How old are existing and legacy SDA properties?
So they could be 20 years old. They could be 30 years old. They received their first certificate of occupancy prior to the 1st of April 2016, which was when SDA came in. So if they're older than that, they will not qualify for new build SDA. But yeah, we don't know how old a lot of those properties are. And I know some of them are quite old and very inferior.
A question from, or a comment from Donna is, there are a lot of vacancies around Australia on the nest, Go Nest, I think, yeah. Look, there's a formula for success here, I think, within US property investments in SDA. Avoid the outer areas of any city. So, for example, southeast Perth, Melbourne, west of Melbourne, Brisbane, west of Brisbane. There are areas where wherever land is cheaper, that's where the investors go because they want to reduce their capital outlay and spend. If you want to succeed in SDA, focus on the middle ring suburbs, middle ring to inner city suburbs, where there's lack of delivery of product for SDA, not the outer ring areas. So within 30 minutes of the CBD of any city, major city, sorry, not an hour drive. 45 minutes an hour out, that's just wrong because everyone's there already. What else?
Yeah, can I add to that?
Knockdown rebuilds as well.
Great.
Is a good option there. Debbie, your turn.
Yeah, I want to add too that the vacancies that you find listed on Housing Hub and Go Nest, a lot of the time they're not even SDA. They'll be still homes. They might be there for short term, medium term. And also they might be advertising one room in a 5-tenant property. So, and we know that those group homes, a group home under the NDIS, under SDA, is any home that is enrolled for 4 or 5 tenants. And we know that very few of those are actually filled. Even 3-tenant homes, most of those don't have more than 2 tenants living in them. So those vacancies, while it might look like a huge amount of vacancies, it's very often just one room in a group home or in a non-SDA property as well. So it's really, you really need to kind of do your filtering carefully to look at what the reality is in terms of SDA vacancies.
Next question from Adam. Do you have established or near complete properties, including apartments, available with SDA in place with participants, communities? We have some houses that are partially filled and built. We have some apartments which are built recently and are for sale with no tenants yet. Again, it goes back to the marketing and tenancy process. When did the provider begin their advertising process to the market? When was the provider engaged? When was the property built? So these are all elements that will affect the answer to your question here. But yeah, I think, Adam, just talk to our office. Give us a call, 1302-254-397. Talk to one of our staff, Matthew or Josh, and they'll give you some options there for you there. But Jason there, who is currently the quickest lender for NDIS finance and best interest rate? They're all slow. The lending process is very slow due to 5 weeks delay by the valuer. It's a 4 to 5 week delay process. There is no such thing as a quick lender. No, it's 8 to 10 weeks to get your finance sorted out and set and ready for settlement. 8 to 10 weeks. Yep. Jason again, do you consider 9-10? Yes. LVR of 90% is a risky process because you've got high LMI, lender's mortgage insurance of 3.5%. I mean, if you were doing multiple purchases and you had a nice big cash buffer and you're a high income earner and you're a higher risk investor, then sure, do 2 or 3 of them at 90% LVRs, yes. But if you are a first time investor or a newbie investor in NDIS, do not go in at 90%. Aim for your 20% minimum deposit or 25-30% total deposit ready for purchase. 90-10 is just too thin. Too thin. No, I wouldn't do it.
No. Unless I think our lender we've had on a couple of webinars previously, Paul Grant said, if you have the cash anyway, you've got that buffer, you may wish to consider doing the 90% just to free up more cash or equity elsewhere. But yeah, you've got to really be comfortable in that position. But Min, look, that covers all the questions that we've had. I think that was
just had another question come through
Yeah.
earlier. Jason said, I actually moved it to answered, but Jason said, besides the obvious points surrounding the SDA acquisition process, I'm assuming that the mandatory fundamentals of property investment are taken into consideration in all cases.
Well, that would imply location, employment hubs, shopping centres, growth corridors.
So yes and no.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Debbie, if you're meeting an investor for the first time, what are your top 3-4 criteria to consideration for an SDA investment?
From the investor's perspective.
Or from our perspective. I mean,
From our
employment hubs are irrelevant, Yeah. Hospitals are important.
The right hospitals are important. The care providers being located in the area are important.
With the right number of staff to handle the rostering.
Yep.
Allied health professionals being nearby.
Yeah. Transport hubs.
Transport hubs with accessibility.
Absolutely.
Totally different from a normal property investor perspective. I would also add in there, Debbie, the flexibility to consider MTA and STA short-term accommodation as a ideal product in this design property. And that is really short-term stay. Because the question here is, what if an SDA house is empty? What do you do with it? So I think a good design property, a very good design property, is important for SDA. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. And excuse my language, but if you buy a shitty design house in a shitty area, you're going to get no results. Like, you want a good area, a good design, good layout for the property for people to live in comfortably, right? And that is different from a normal property investment strategy.
Yeah.
That's my answer. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I think I'm done.
Oh no, there is one more.
Oh, more questions
from Jason again. One part contract's risky given the finance parameters.
Debbie, you.
Okay, so it depends on what kind of a one contract you're purchasing. If you go through the process with one of several third-party organizations out there that will convert your two-part contract to one part, it's obviously going to make your investment significantly more. So that will potentially reduce your yield, your income, your cash flow. But there are one-part options. There are villas, there are apartments. We also work with some developers that can provide packages, house and land package still to be constructed, but as a one part, they already own the land or whatever the arrangement is, that they can sell it as a single contract with deposit down and then the settlement on completion, and you're buying a single property. So, if you're looking at this from an SMSF perspective, yeah, you do need to make sure that income and the potential income is going to ensure you've got a cash flow positive return on that. So that's probably the main consideration I would think there. Min?
Debbie, in our future webinars, maybe in 2 months' time, we should do a different types of SDAs available in terms of not only just houses, villas, and apartments, but
Mhm.
also fractional, joint venture, one part, two parts as well.
Yeah.
Just to show our viewers the products on the landscape available to them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I'm
more in
glad that
depth
you
detail.
mentioned that fractional investment, Min, because we have another webinar coming up in a couple of weeks on the 17th of July, I believe, that we're going to be holding with Lisa Thomas from Supervest, all about their new fractional investment offering for SDA properties. So if you don't have the ability or the willingness to purchase a whole property, to spend, between 700,000 and 1.5 million on one SDA property, but you still want to get into the SDA investment world, for as little as 60 to 80 or 90,000, you could become a part owner as a fractional investor in one of these properties. So Lisa's going to be there to explain how that works and give us an overview of the current properties that they are selling at the moment.
Wonderful. Debbie, thank you so much for your time. All the
Thank
listeners
you,
here and
Min.
viewers, thank you so much as well. We look forward to seeing you all again in 2 weeks' time for the next webinar.
We do. All right. Thanks, everyone, for your time today. Bye.
Bye-bye.